The first sign that someone is dangerous is not what they do when trouble arrives. It's how calm they remain while everyone else is looking for the exits. The Helios trade nexus floated above the pale rings of Asteron like a city made of glass and starlight. More than 12 million beings passed through its docking corridors every month. Freight captains, diplomats, corporate executives, explorers, smugglers pretending not to be smugglers. The station never truly slept. Even now, the vast central concourse hummed with overlapping languages, glowing advertisements, and the distant vibration of cargo haulers moving thousands of tons of merchandise through the docking lattice. Alara Voss barely noticed any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the contract hovering above the conference table. Blue light reflected across her pale skin and silver hair as she reviewed the final security recommendations from her advisory board. 3 assassination attempts in 6 months had a way of changing priorities. None of them had succeeded. None had even come close. But the pattern was impossible to ignore. Someone wanted access to her shipping empire. Someone was becoming impatient. You need a larger protection team, one advisor insisted. At minimum, 20 personnel. I don't need 20 personnel, Alara replied. I need competence. The room fell silent. Nobody argued with her when she used that tone. A soft chime interrupted the meeting. The station security director entered carrying a slim data tablet. His expression looked oddly tense. Miss Voss, he said carefully, there is one final candidate. Alara leaned back in her chair. One. His references are unusual. That usually means expensive. Not this time. That got her attention. The security director placed the tablet onto the table. A profile expanded above the surface. Ethan Hayes, human, age 38, former military, former search and rescue specialist, former security consultant. The image showed a broad-shouldered man with dark brown hair and calm gray-blue eyes. Nothing about him seemed remarkable. No impressive list of elite certifications. No corporate endorsements. No celebrity clients. No dramatic reputation. Just a long record of completed contracts and routine evaluations. Alara frowned. This is your recommendation? Yes. Why? The director hesitated. For the first time since entering the room, he appeared uncomfortable. His results speak for themselves. His results are average. No, the director said quietly. His reports are average. That's different. Alara studied the profile again. She disliked mysteries, especially when they involved people responsible for keeping her alive. Bring him in. The conference room doors slid open several minutes later. The human entered without ceremony. No dramatic entrance. No attempt to impress anyone. He wore a simple dark jacket and carried no visible equipment beyond a small travel bag slung over one shoulder. His posture was relaxed, almost casual. Yet something about him immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Not because he demanded attention, because he seemed completely uninterested in receiving it. Ethan Hayes stopped beside the table. Miss Voss. His voice was steady and low. Mr. Hayes. Alara folded her arms. You understand the position? Protect you. Identify threats. Avoid unnecessary complications. And if complications become necessary, a faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Then they're no longer unnecessary. One of the advisors chuckled. Another shifted uneasily. Ethan seemed unaware of either reaction. Alara continued studying him. Most professional bodyguards projected confidence. Some projected intimidation. Ethan projected neither. He looked like someone waiting for a delayed train. Calm, patient, entirely unbothered. Tell me why I should hire you, she said. You shouldn't. Several advisors exchanged confused looks. Alara raised an eyebrow. That's not usually the correct answer. You asked for a reason. I don't know enough about you to give one. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, surprisingly, Alara laughed. The first genuine laugh she had experienced all week. That's the most honest answer I've heard in months. Ethan nodded once. Honesty saves time. The interview ended 20 minutes later. The contract was approved almost immediately. Yet, as Ethan left the room, something unexpected happened. A junior security officer passing through the hallway glanced at the human's personnel file. The officer froze. His face lost color. He looked at Ethan, then at the file, then back at Ethan. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "you're from Earth." Ethan adjusted the strap on his travel bag. "Last time I checked." The officer stepped aside so quickly he nearly collided with the wall. Ethan thanked him politely and continued down the corridor. Alara noticed the entire exchange through the transparent conference window. "That was strange," she said. The security director stared after the departing human. "Yes. Why did that officer react like that?" The director looked toward the stars beyond the station glass. For several long seconds, he said nothing. Then he finally answered, "Because most people hear the word Earth and think of a planet." His expression tightened. "The ones who know better hear something else." "What?" Alara asked. The director's eyes remained fixed on the distant corridor where Ethan Hayes had disappeared. A death world. The next morning, Helios Trade Nexus glowed beneath a river of moving traffic. Thousands of vessels drifted through designated lanes beyond the transparent station walls, their navigation lights flickering against the darkness like artificial stars. Inside docking Sector 12, the air carried the faint scent of recycled oxygen, machine lubricant, and freshly brewed CAF from nearby kiosks. Alara Voss stood beside her transport shuttle, reviewing shipment projections on a floating display, while station personnel loaded the final cargo containers. Her company operated across 27 systems. Every minute mattered. Every delay cost money. Normally, she would have been focused entirely on business. Instead, she found herself watching Ethan Hayes. The human stood 20 feet away near the boarding ramp. He was doing absolutely nothing. At least, that was how it appeared. His hands rested loosely inside his jacket pockets. His expression remained calm. He was not checking security feeds. He was not scanning crowds with obvious vigilance. He was not issuing instructions to station staff. Compared to the highly aggressive bodyguard she had hired in the past, he looked almost lazy. "Does he always do that?" Alara asked. Her logistics coordinator glanced toward Ethan. "Do what?" "Stand there." The coordinator shrugged. "I think so." Alara frowned. Somehow that answer annoyed her. Around them, dozens of beings hurried through the docking concourse. Freight workers guided cargo sleds loaded with industrial equipment. Families moved toward passenger terminals. Merchants negotiated contracts while rushing between appointments. Everyone seemed busy except Ethan. Yet every time Alara looked away and then back again, she noticed something strange. He had moved. Not much. Only a few feet. A different angle. A different position. Always somewhere that provided a clear view of the surrounding area. Always somewhere that gave him line of sight to her location. Never obvious. Never dramatic. Just quietly efficient. "Interesting," she murmured. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "That is not the word most people use." Alara turned. A station customs officer stood nearby holding a data scanner. The officer belonged to a species known for exceptional pattern recognition and analytical memory. "What word do they use?" Alara asked. The officer looked toward Ethan. "Concerning." Before Alara could ask another question, the officer suddenly checked his scanner and walked away faster than necessary. She stared after him. That was the third unusual reaction she had witnessed in less than 24 hours. By noon, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. During a scheduled business meeting inside Helios Financial Tower, 3 corporate executives arrived to discuss a new transport contract. The negotiations proceeded smoothly until Ethan entered the conference room carrying 2 cups of coffee. One executive stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Another sat noticeably straighter. The third kept glancing toward the human as if trying to solve a puzzle. Ethan placed a cup beside Alara and quietly returned to his position near the wall. He never interrupted, never participated, never even appeared interested in the conversation. Yet the atmosphere shifted immediately. After the meeting concluded, one executive lingered behind. "Miss Voss," he said carefully, "may I ask where you found him?" "Found who?" "Your bodyguard." Alara looked up from her tablet. "Why?" The executive hesitated. "No reason." "That is not true." He forced a nervous smile. Let's simply say that his reputation travels farther than he does. Then he left before she could ask another question. By evening, curiosity had replaced irritation. Something was happening. Everyone seemed to know something she did not. The answer finally arrived as the station lights dimmed into artificial night cycle. Alara sat alone inside the observation lounge, overlooking the ringed planet below. Soft music drifted through the room. Stars reflected across the glass. The station security director approached, carrying a drink. You have questions, he said. Edo. He sat across from her. About Ethan. Everyone reacts when they learn he is from Earth. The director nodded. Yes. Why? He studied the stars for several moments before answering. Because most civilizations spend centuries adapting themselves to survive their worlds. And humans survived first. Alara remained silent. The director continued. Earth has stronger gravity than most inhabited planets. Dangerous weather patterns. Extreme environmental variation. Predators. Diseases. Geological instability. Competition for resources. By galactic standards, it should never have produced a spacefaring species. But it did. Exactly. The director took a slow sip from his glass. That fact makes many people uncomfortable. Alara thought about Ethan standing quietly near the docking ramp. Calm. Unbothered. Ordinary. He does not seem dangerous. The director laughed softly. The truly dangerous ones rarely do. Across the station, several decks away, Ethan sat alone in a small cafeteria, finishing dinner. He glanced toward the large viewport beside his table. A transport vessel was approaching the station. Nothing unusual, except for the three figures watching him from the arriving ship's passenger deck. They were not interested in Helios Trade Nexus. They were not interested in Alara Voss. Their eyes never left Ethan Hayes. And as the vessel completed its docking sequence, one of them quietly smiled. The following morning began with rain. Not real rain, of course. Helios Trade Nexus simulated weather inside several of its luxury districts to make long-term residents feel more comfortable. Fine droplets drifted from concealed atmospheric emitters above the promenade, while artificial clouds glowed beneath the station ceiling 300 feet overhead. Most visitors enjoyed the illusion. Ethan Hayes barely noticed it. He walked half a step behind Alara Voss as they crossed the upper commercial sector toward a private investor summit. Around them, expensive storefronts displayed everything from quantum processors to handcrafted sculptures imported from distant systems. Wealth moved through these corridors like an invisible current. So did ambition. Alara adjusted the sleeve of her silver jacket and glanced sideways at her bodyguard. Do you ever get nervous? Ethan looked up from the station map, displayed on his wrist communicator. About what? Anything. He considered the question. Running out of coffee. She stared at him. That is your answer. It happens more often than people think. For the first time that morning, she smiled. Ethan returned his attention to the crowd. The smile disappeared from her face when she noticed something unusual. People were watching him again. Not openly. Most tried to be subtle. A merchant behind a kiosk. Two transport officers near an elevator. A group of university students seated beside a fountain. Each reaction lasted only seconds, but the pattern was unmistakable. They recognized him. Or perhaps they recognized what he was. Alara had spent most of the previous night researching Earth. The deeper she searched, the stranger the information became. Planetary gravity nearly 40% above galactic average. Massive oceans capable of generating storms thousands of miles wide. Predatory wildlife. Tectonic instability. Seasonal temperature extremes. Entire ecosystems built around competition. Every report seemed to end with the same conclusion. Humans should have struggled merely to survive. Instead, they had flourished. You have been researching Earth, Ethan said suddenly. Alara blinked. How did you know that? You keep looking at me like I am a science project. You noticed that? Everyone notices when someone studies them. She folded her arms. Fine. Then answer a question. Depends on the question. Why does everyone react when they find out you are human? Ethan was silent for several steps. People like stories. That is not an answer. It is part of one. He stopped beside a transparent observation wall overlooking the station interior. Hundreds of shuttles moved through distant docking lanes below. Most people have never visited Earth, he said, so they fill the gaps with imagination. And are they wrong? Ethan glanced at her. Usually, before she could continue, her communicator chimed. An incoming message marked Priority 1. Alara opened it immediately. Her expression changed. What happened? Ethan asked. A shipping broker canceled a contract worth 80 million credits. Why? No explanation. Another alert appeared. Then another. And another. 3 separate meetings scheduled for the afternoon had suddenly been postponed. A fourth canceled entirely. Alara frowned. None of it made sense. Her company had one of the strongest reputations in known space. Businesses did not simply walk away from opportunities like this. Not without a reason. Ethan read her expression. Something changed. Clearly. When did the cancellations begin? She checked the timestamps. Her eyes narrowed. Every single one had arrived within the last hour. Ethan looked across the crowded promenade. His calm expression never shifted. Yet something in his posture changed. A slight adjustment. A subtle focus. Like a machine switching modes. What is it? Alara asked. Nothing yet. That answer worried her more than if he had said there was a problem. They continued toward the summit hall. Halfway there, an elderly alien businessman stepped from a side corridor and nearly collided with them. The moment he recognized Ethan, he froze. Genuine surprise crossed his face. Then something else. Respect. The old businessman lowered his head slightly toward the human. Not enough to attract attention. Just enough to be intentional. Ethan nodded back. No words were exchanged. The businessman continued on his way. Alara stopped walking. You know him? No, then why did he do that? Ethan resumed moving. You would have to ask him. She hurried to catch up. You are impossible. I have been called worse. Meanwhile, 3 decks below, inside a private lounge hidden from public traffic, several figures sat around a circular table illuminated by blue holographic light. Detailed financial reports floated above the surface. Shipping routes, corporate assets, security records. One image remained fixed at the center of the display. Ethan Hayes, a gray-skinned figure, leaned forward. Confirmation? Another nodded. Confirmed. The human is still with her? Yes. Silence followed. Not fearful silence. Anticipatory silence. The kind investors showed before discovering a priceless resource. Finally, the oldest member of the group smiled. Excellent. His eyes remained fixed on Ethan's image. Prepare the offers. Across the station, unaware of the conversation unfolding beneath his feet, Ethan followed Alara into the summit hall. Yet somewhere deep inside, instincts sharpened by a lifetime on Earth quietly stirred. Someone was watching. And unlike the others, these observers were not merely curious. By the time the investor summit ended, Helios Trade Nexus had entered its evening cycle. The artificial sky above the luxury district shifted into deep shades of violet and gold, while thousands of embedded lights awakened across the station's interior. From a distance, the massive structure looked less like a transportation hub and more like a floating constellation. Alara Voss should have been satisfied. The summit had produced new partnerships, fresh negotiations, and several promising leads. Instead, she walked through the corridor outside the convention center, carrying a growing sense of unease. Too many things had stopped making sense. The canceled contracts, the nervous reactions, the constant attention surrounding Ethan Hayes. None of it fit together. Ahead of her, Ethan pushed open a glass security door leading toward a private transit lift. He moved with the same quiet confidence he always displayed. No urgency, no visible concern. The calmness was beginning to irritate her. You know something? She said. Ethan pressed the elevator call button. Probably. About what is happening. Maybe. She folded her arms. That is not helpful. Neither is guessing. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As the doors opened, a young station attendant standing inside noticed Ethan. The attendant froze. A tablet slipped slightly in his hands. His eyes widened. Then he stepped aside so quickly that he nearly forgot to exit. Ethan nodded politely. Thank you. The attendant simply stared as the doors closed again. Alara exhaled slowly. That keeps happening. Yes. And you still refuse to explain it. Because I do not know exactly what they heard. Heard what? Ethan looked toward the elevator ceiling. Stories. The answer only deepened the mystery. 20 minutes later, they arrived at one of Alara's private executive lounges overlooking the station's central transit sphere. Hundreds of vessels moved through the transparent chamber beyond the windows. Cargo frates, luxury yachts, passenger liners. Their navigation lights drifted through the darkness like glowing rivers. Alara settled into a chair and opened her terminal. Ethan remained near the window. Then a notification appeared. Priority classified. Unknown sender. She frowned and activated the file. A holographic document unfolded above her desk. At first she thought it was some kind of financial report. Then she noticed the numbers. Her eyes narrowed. That cannot be right. Ethan glanced over. Problem? I'm not sure. She expanded the file. Several transactions appeared. Enormous transactions. Millions of credits. Tens of millions. Then hundreds of millions. Each linked to encrypted organizations scattered across multiple systems. The same phrase appeared repeatedly beside every entry. Acquisition bid. Alara leaned forward. What is this? The answer appeared at the bottom of the report. Subject of interest, human Deathworld asset. Ethan Hayes. The room became very quiet. Even the distant hum of station machinery seemed to fade. Alara stared at the screen, then at Ethan, then back at the screen again. This has to be fake. Ethan walked over slowly. His expression never changed as he reviewed the document. No. Looks authentic. Someone is offering 300 million credits. That one is actually lower than expected. Alara blinked. Lower than expected? Ethan nodded. Depends who is bidding. She stared at him as though he had spoken another language. People are trying to buy you. Technically, they're trying to recruit me. For 300 million credits? Apparently. Alara looked down at the document again. Another notification appeared. Then another. New bids. Larger numbers. Different organizations. Different systems. Different sectors of the galaxy. Every few seconds, the value increased. 400 million. 500 million. 600 million credits. She suddenly understood why business negotiations had collapsed earlier. Why executives had acted strangely. Why station personnel reacted the moment they learned Ethan came from Earth. Someone had circulated information. The entire station knew. Ethan Hayes was no longer just a bodyguard. He had become the most valuable person on Helios. Across the station, inside the hidden lounge, 3 decks below, the gray-skinned organizer watched new bids appear on a floating display. Investors, corporations, private governments, and research consortiums continued joining the auction. The numbers climbed higher with every minute. The old figure smiled. They are interested. One of his associates looked uncertain. What if the human refuses? The old figure's smile widened. That is the beauty of rarity. He turned toward the projection of Ethan Hayes, rotating slowly above the table. Everyone assumes there is a price. Far above them, standing beside the observation window, Ethan watched the stars moving beyond the station glass. For the first time since Alara had hired him, something almost resembling concern appeared in his eyes. Not because people wanted him, because he recognized exactly what kind of people had started asking. Sleep became difficult after that. Not for Ethan, for Alara. Long after Midnight's cycle settled across Helios' trade nexus, she remained awake inside her private suite staring at the auction report hovering above her desk. The numbers had continued climbing for hours. Corporations, governments, research organizations, private investors. Every category of influence seemed represented. Yet none of the files explained the same thing. Why? Why would anyone spend fortunes pursuing a single human? Outside her panoramic window, streams of station traffic drifted through the darkness. Navigation beacons blinked red, blue, and white against the stars. The sight usually calmed her. Tonight, it only deepened the questions. Finally, she opened a secure network channel and began searching deeper than public databases allowed. The first reports focused on human adaptability. The second discussed Earth biology. The third examined long-term survival rates of various species operating in extreme environments. Then she found something interesting. Human consultants consistently outperformed specialized teams during unpredictable crises. Not because they were stronger, not because they were smarter, because they adapted faster. She continued reading. Human crews survived equipment failures that should have ended missions. Human engineers repaired systems using parts never designed to work together. Human explorers crossed environments that other species classified as unacceptable risks. Over and over, the same phrase appeared. Operational flexibility. Alara leaned back slowly. For the first time, the auction began making a strange kind of sense. People were not bidding on a bodyguard. They were bidding on possibility. The next morning, she found Ethan sitting alone in a small cafe overlooking Docking Ring 4. Steam rose from a mug of coffee resting near his elbow. A digital newspaper floated above the table. He looked entirely unconcerned by the fact that half the station apparently wanted him. "You knew," Alara said as she approached. Ethan glanced up. "About the auction? About why they are interested." He took a sip of coffee. "Some of it." She sat across from him. "You could have warned me. Would it have changed anything?" She opened her mouth, then stopped. Annoyingly, he had a point. "No," she admitted. Ethan nodded. "Exactly." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable silence, just quiet. Around them, travelers moved through the terminal carrying luggage, business cases, and cargo manifests. Announcements echoed softly overhead. Somewhere nearby, a maintenance drone hummed past. "So what do they actually want?" Alara finally asked. Ethan stared out the window at the ships beyond the glass. "Different people want different things, such as some want expertise, some want reputation, some want insurance." Insurance? If you're exploring somewhere dangerous, hiring someone from Earth makes investors feel better. Alara blinked. "You are serious." "Completely." She laughed despite herself. "That is ridiculous." "Maybe." Ethan smiled faintly. "But it works." Before she could continue, a shadow crossed the table. Both looked up. An elderly alien gentleman stood beside them, wearing an immaculate dark suit. His silver walking cane glimmered beneath the station lights. Alara recognized him immediately. Marcus Talon, founder of one of the largest logistics consortiums in known space. A man worth more credits than some planetary governments. "Miss Voss," he said politely. "Mr. Hayes." Ethan nodded. "Good morning." The older man smiled. "I was hoping we might speak." Alara noticed something unusual. Marcus Talon was not looking at her. He was looking at Ethan. Not with fear, not even with curiosity. With respect. Genuine respect. "I assume this is about the auction," Ethan said. "Partially. Then my answer remains the same." Marcus chuckled softly. "I expected as much." He adjusted his cane and lowered his voice. "Be careful, son." The words sounded oddly sincere. Not everyone joining this competition understands what they are chasing. Ethan's expression remained calm. "I know." The older man glanced toward Alara. "Then perhaps the wiser question is whether she knows." Without another word, Marcus Talon departed into the crowd. Alara watched him disappear among hundreds of travelers. Then she turned back toward Ethan. What did he mean by that? Ethan looked down into his coffee. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed uncertain how to answer. "That," he said quietly, "is what worries me too." Later that evening, Helios Trade Nexus felt different. The station had not changed. The lights still shimmered across polished corridors. Cargo vessels still moved through docking lanes. Conversations still echoed through restaurants, observation decks, and commercial plazas. Yet something invisible had shifted. Information was spreading. Alara could feel it. Every time she entered a room, conversations paused for a fraction of a second. Every time Ethan appeared, eyes followed him. Not fearful eyes, interested eyes, calculating eyes. The kind of attention that made experienced business leaders uncomfortable. She stood beside a floor-to-ceiling observation window, overlooking the central transit sphere, while hundreds of ships drifted through the enormous chamber beyond the glass. Ethan sat nearby, reading a maintenance report he had somehow acquired for a shuttle that did not even belong to them. "Why are you reading that?" Alara asked. "Because it is interesting. It is a maintenance report." "Exactly." She laughed softly and shook her head. "You might be the strangest person I have ever met." Ethan closed the file. "I have competition." The answer earned another smile. The silence that followed felt surprisingly comfortable. That realization caught Alara off guard. She had hired bodyguards before. Many of them. Most had treated her like a client. Others treated her like an assignment. Ethan treated her like a person. The difference was subtle but impossible to miss. Outside the window, a transport convoy entered the station's approach corridor. White navigation lights reflected across the glass. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Alara finally asked the question that had been bothering her for days. What was Earth really like? Ethan leaned back in his chair. Which version? There are multiple versions? Depend on who you ask. He looked toward the stars. Some people remember cities. Some remember oceans. Some remember mountains. Some remember family. His voice remained calm. Most people spend their lives trying to explain Earth. Nobody ever succeeds. Alara listened quietly. Do you miss it? Every day. The answer arrived immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. For some reason, that simple honesty carried more weight than anything else he had said. Before she could respond, her communicator activated. A secure transmission request appeared. Then another. Then 3 more. Ethan glanced at the notifications. Busy evening. You have no idea. Alara opened the first message. A corporate executive offered a private meeting regarding Ethan's future employment opportunities. The second proposed an exclusive security partnership. The third suggested an investment arrangement involving long-term contractual rights. She stared at the screen. This is getting ridiculous. Ethan did not seem surprised. It will get worse. How do you know? Because they still think this is about money. A faint frown crossed her face. Then what is it about? Ethan watched the approaching convoy outside the window. Value. That sounds like money. Not always. Before Alara could ask another question, station-wide notification tones echoed through the observation deck. Several nearby, travelers checked their devices. A moment later, whispers began spreading across the room. Screens changed. News feeds updated. Public information boards displayed the same headline. Human acquisition auction exceeds 1 billion credits. The reaction was immediate. Some passengers appeared shocked, others impressed. A few simply stared at Ethan. 1 billion credits. Even Alara struggled to comprehend the number. Slowly, she looked toward the human sitting beside her. Ethan merely sighed. Not proud, not excited, just tired. You knew this would happen, she said quietly. I hoped it would not. Why? Ethan looked at the headline glowing across dozens of screens. For the first time since she had met him, genuine concern appeared in his eyes. Because when people stop seeing a person, he said softly, they start seeing an asset. And somewhere within Helios' trade nexus, far beyond the observation deck, and hidden beneath layers of privacy encryption, several powerful individuals watched the same headline appear. Unlike everyone else, they were not surprised. They were pleased. The auction had achieved exactly what they wanted. The entire galaxy was looking at Ethan Hayes, which meant nobody had noticed who was quietly moving into position around him. The next day began with silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles over a place just before something changes. Helios Trade Nexus continued operating at full capacity. Cargo moved through docking corridors. Business negotiations filled conference halls. Travelers crossed transit bridges suspended above endless streams of starships. Everything appeared normal. Yet Ethan Hayes noticed small details that did not belong. A maintenance drone paused too long near a restricted elevator. A visitor spent 20 minutes pretending to study a directory while watching a security checkpoint. A cargo shipment changed destinations 3 times in 6 hours. None of those things meant trouble by themselves. Together, they formed a pattern. Ethan stood beside a transparent walkway overlooking the station's central sphere and watched hundreds of vessels drifting through controlled approach lanes. Behind him, Alara reviewed reports from her office terminal. "You have been quiet all morning," she said. "I am usually quiet. More than usual." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is difficult to measure." Alara looked up from her display. "You are worried?" The answer did not come immediately. Outside the glass, a passenger liner rotated slowly as docking guidance lights flashed across its hull. Finally, Ethan nodded. A little. The admission caught her attention. During the past week, she had seen him remain calm through corporate pressure, endless speculation, and a billion-credit auction centered on his existence. Hearing concern in his voice felt unusual. "Because of the auction?" she asked. "Because of attention." "Same thing." "Not exactly." Ethan crossed his arms and continued watching the station traffic. Attention attracts people. That seems obvious. Some people arrive because they are curious. He pointed toward the moving ships. Others arrive because they want something. Alara followed his gaze. Hundreds of vessels. Thousands of passengers. Millions of possibilities. For the first time, she realized how impossible it would be to track everyone entering the station. Her communicator chimed. A secure message appeared from station security. She opened it, then frowned. "What is it?" Ethan asked. 3 independent organizations requested meetings with me today. That is not unusual. They all requested the same thing. Ethan already knew the answer. She could see it in his expression. "They want access to you." He nodded once. "I thought so." An hour later, the requests became offers, then incentives, then partnership proposals. Some promised wealth. Others promised influence. One offered enough credits to purchase an entire planetary shipping network. Ethan rejected every proposal before Alara finished reading them. "You are not even considering the numbers?" she asked. "No, what?" "Because they are asking the wrong question." Alara leaned back in her chair. "What is the right question?" Ethan looked toward the stars beyond the window. "Why would someone need to buy cooperation?" The room grew quiet. The answer lingered between them long after he spoke it. Later that afternoon, they visited one of Helios Station's upper observation decks. The ceiling stretched nearly 200 feet overhead. Artificial sunlight filtered through crystalline panels. Families, tourists, and business travelers gathered around the enormous viewing gallery to watch vessels arrive from distant systems. It should have felt relaxing. Instead, Ethan noticed something else. People were beginning to recognize Alara too. Not because of her company, because she was standing beside him. Their stories had become connected. The realization unsettled him more than the auction ever had. As they walked along the observation rail, an elderly woman approached. Human, perhaps 70 years old. White hair, kind eyes. She glanced at Ethan and smiled. "Earth?" she asked. Ethan smiled back. "Earth." The woman nodded. "Good to see one of us out here." Then she continued on her way. Alara watched the exchange. "You know her?" "Never met her before." "Then why did that feel different from everyone else?" Ethan's gaze followed the woman disappearing into the crowd. "Because she was not looking at an asset." The words remained with Alara long after the moment passed. Somewhere else on the station, hidden behind encrypted networks and private security layers, several influential figures reviewed new intelligence reports. One image dominated every display. Ethan Hayes. One of them finally broke the silence. "The human is becoming harder to reach." Another nodded. "Then we adjust." A third figure smiled as a transport schedule appeared above the table. "No," he said quietly. "We move sooner." And for the first time since arriving at Helios Trade Nexus, events already in motion began moving faster than anyone could see. The change arrived during Transit Cycle 17. No alarm sounded. No dramatic announcements echoed through the station. On the surface, Helios Trade Nexus appeared exactly as it always had. Millions of passengers moved through corridors. Cargo schedules updated across commercial networks. Starships arrived and departed according to carefully coordinated traffic patterns. Yet beneath the routine, something was happening. Ethan sensed it before he understood it. He stood beside the viewport of a private transport tram, carrying him and Alara across the station's upper ring. Outside the transparent hull, docking lights stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of vessels floated against the darkness beyond the station. Alara reviewed shipment contracts on a floating display, while Ethan watched reflections moving across the glass. "You are doing it again," she said without looking up. "Doing what?" "Thinking." Ethan smiled faintly. "That is usually encouraged. Not when it gives me the feeling that something is wrong." The smile faded. "Fair point." Alara lowered her display. "What is it?" For several seconds, he remained silent. The tram glided through an illuminated tunnel connecting two sectors of the station. White light flashed rhythmically across the windows. "Have you ever noticed," Ethan said quietly, "that people become predictable when they want something? I work in business. That is practically a job requirement. Then you understand." He nodded toward the passing station infrastructure outside. "Everyone has been focused on the auction. That is understandable." "Too understandable." Alara frowned. The answer bothered her because she immediately understood what he meant. Attention had become concentrated in one place. Every conversation, every news feed, every rumor. Ethan Hayes, human, Deathworlder, billion credit asset. The entire station had become distracted. The tram arrived at the executive district. As they stepped onto the platform, Ethan noticed something unusual. Security presence had increased. Additional patrols moved through the concourse. Surveillance drones hovered above intersections. At first glance, it looked reassuring. Then he realized the patrol patterns were wrong. Too visible, too concentrated in public areas. Security designed to be seen, rather than security designed to observe. "Interesting," he murmured. "What?" Alara asked. "Someone wants everyone to feel safe." They continued toward a private conference complex where Alara was scheduled to meet several shipping partners. Along the way, more signs appeared. Restricted corridors temporarily closed. Cargo routes redirected. Communications delays blamed on network maintenance. Individually insignificant. Together, impossible to ignore. By afternoon, Ethan had stopped counting. Then came a message. It arrived through a secure channel reserved for station administration. Short. No identifying markers. Just 7 words. "You're looking in the wrong direction." Ethan read it twice, then deleted it. "Bad news?" Alara asked. "Not yet." She sighed. "You really enjoy giving incomplete answers. Only when they are accurate." Hours later, as station evening cycles settled across Helios, they found themselves once again standing inside the observation district overlooking the transit sphere. The artificial sky above had darkened into deep indigo. Thousands of lights reflected across the curved glass architecture. Beyond the station walls, stars stretched endlessly across the void. Alara rested against the observation rail. "I've been thinking about something." "That sounds dangerous," Ethan said. She rolled her eyes. "Why are you still here?" Ethan looked surprised. "I work here." "That is not what I mean." She turned toward him. "You could leave." The question lingered between them. The auction, the attention, the offers. You could walk away from all of it. Ethan looked through the glass toward the distant stars. "Probably." "Then why stay?" For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his answer came quietly. "Because I gave my word." Alara blinked. "That is it. That is enough." The simplicity of the answer struck her harder than she expected. In a station filled with contracts, negotiations, and billion credit offers, Ethan's decision rested on a promise. Nothing more, nothing less. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from a balcony 3 levels above. Hidden among tourists, the observer quietly activated a communicator. "Confirmation," a voice asked. The figure continued watching Ethan and Alara below. "Confirmed." "Proceed." A brief pause followed. Then the observer smiled. "Yes." Across Helios Trade Nexus, plans that had been forming in secret finally moved into their final stage. And for the first time since arriving on the station, the people watching Ethan Hayes no longer intended to wait. The final stage began not with a confrontation, but with a revelation. Early the next morning, Helios Trade Nexus awoke to a flood of leaked information spreading across every major network on the station. Anonymous records, internal communications, financial transfers, hidden agreements. Within hours, the truth became impossible to contain. The billion credit auction had never been about employment. It had never been about consulting contracts or security services. A small group of influential organizations had quietly manipulated the entire process in an attempt to turn a human being into a commodity. Public reaction arrived swiftly. Not outrage alone. Embarrassment. Disbelief. Even many of the individuals who had participated in the bidding withdrew immediately once the full story became visible. They had believed they were competing for access to rare expertise. Instead, they discovered they had become part of something far less honorable. By midday, every major offer connected to Ethan Hayes had been canceled. Every private acquisition proposal vanished. Every contract dissolved. The auction collapsed almost overnight. Alara stood in her office watching the reports arrive one after another. For days she had expected some dramatic ending, some final negotiation, some last attempt by powerful people to secure what they wanted. Instead, the entire scheme was unraveling under the weight of its own exposure. Across the room, Ethan sat near the window drinking coffee. He looked exactly the same as he had on the day she hired him. Calm, relaxed, entirely uninterested in the headlines, now carrying his name across dozens of systems. "You do not seem surprised," Alara said. Ethan lowered the mug. "People usually stop when they realize they crossed a line." "Not everyone." "No," he smiled faintly. "But enough." Outside the glass, a cargo vessel departed the station and disappeared into the darkness between stars. For a while, neither spoke. The station felt different now. Lighter somehow. The constant attention had begun fading. Travelers were returning to their own concerns. Businesses were focusing on actual business again. The strange fever surrounding Ethan Hayes was finally ending. "I think I understand now," Alara said quietly. Ethan looked at her. "Understand what?" She considered the question carefully. "Why they wanted you." "Why?" "Because they thought being human was your advantage." Ethan waited, but that was never the important part. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. "Go on." Alara looked toward the stars. They saw survival, adaptability, strength, problem-solving. They saw everything humans can do. She turned back toward him. "They never noticed why you do it." For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile he used in meetings. A genuine one. That is probably the closest answer. The silence that followed felt comfortable. Beyond the station, endless fields of stars stretched across the void. Somewhere among them waited new contracts, new systems, new problems, and new journeys. Life would continue moving forward. It always did. 2 days later, Ethan's contract officially ended. There was no ceremony, no press conference, no public recognition, just a digital signature and a completed agreement. Exactly the way he preferred it. As he prepared to leave, Alara accompanied him to a quiet observation deck overlooking the docking sphere. Ships drifted through the darkness beyond the glass like lanterns floating across an ocean at night. "What will you do now?" she asked. Ethan adjusted the strap of his travel bag. "Find another job." She laughed softly. "Of course you will." He glanced toward the stars. "What about you?" "I have an empire to run." "Sound exhausting." "It is." For a moment, neither moved. Then a boarding announcement echoed through the observation deck. Ethan's transport was ready. He nodded once. "Take care of yourself, Alara." "You too, Ethan." He turned and walked toward the departure gate. No dramatic forward. No grand speech. Just a man carrying a travel bag, disappearing into a crowd of strangers. Alara watched until he vanished from sight. Then she looked out through the glass. Far beyond the station, stars reflected across the darkness like scattered diamonds. She remembered the question that had started everything. Why was the galaxy so fascinated by humans? Now, she finally had an answer. It was not because humans came from a death world. It was not because they survived impossible environments. It was not because they could adapt to almost anything. It was because in a galaxy obsessed with value, power, and ownership, some humans still believed a promise mattered more than a fortune. Outside the station, a small transport vessel accelerated toward the stars. Inside, Ethan Hayes sat quietly beside a window, watching the light of Helios fade into the distance. And for the first time in weeks, nobody was trying to buy him. They were simply letting him go. The stars reflected in the glass beside him, and for a brief moment, they looked almost like home.